Hello to everyone. I am Ari Melber. Welcome to Election Day in New Hampshire. We are live in Manchester here at the Penstock Restaurant. You can hear the great crowd and the great energy of New Hampshire voters. This is the first in the nation primary, and it is now underway. This is historic as well. It's the 100th anniversary of this state's influential primary. Now, after everything that went down in Iowa, today's election, all the more crucial to candidates hoping to have a breakout moment. Let's get into the facts. 24 national delegates up for grabs right now today. Candidates need at least 15% of the vote to get delegates, and the heat is on. Democratic hopefuls furiously pushing their messages out to the masses.
I refuse to suggest any Democrat can lose. I think, we could run Mickey Mouse against this president and have a shot.
The president thinks that you're a sucker. He's like the rooster who thinks he made the sun come up.
Well, I have a lot of respect for Pete, but I know I've got the experience.
I got the best chance at beating Donald Trump because I'm going to bring this party together.
I cannot wait to get people to vote today.
It's really about saying thank you. It's about making sure voters get out and actually cast their votes. And we're moving on directly to South Carolina.
We have an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families all across this country.
To Joe Biden's point, we should note Mickey Mouse has very high favorable ratings. The state could be the last stand for some of these candidates. Take a look at the Real Clear Politics polling average, where Sanders is the top of the pack, around 29. Elizabeth Warren and Biden down, tied at fourth place. Michael Bennet near the zeros. Will the day end with fewer candidates than it began with? And what's happening out on the ground? We get right to it with NBC's Tremaine Lee, who's outside a polling station in Keene, NBC's Morgan Radford out in Nashua. Tremaine?
That's right. We're here in Keene, a city of about 19,000 people. Of those 19,000, a couple thousand are actually college students. There are 3 colleges here in this city, and all the campaigns have been spending a lot of time and money here. You see, we're here outside the polling place. We have volunteers for the different campaigns. But we also have some college students from Keene State College. We have Lauren, Christian, and Jessica. Lauren, who did you vote for and why?
I voted for Elizabeth Warren, and I voted Democratic because that's what benefits my union for my dad, and, I still depend on him, so.
Excellent. And Christian?
I voted for Andrew Yang.
Yang gang?
Yeah. My dad also works for the union, so it benefits me as well, and I feel like as a young community, we have a lot to say. It's our future, so we need to make a change.
Thank you. Jessica?
I voted for Bernie Sanders because I just felt like I vibed with his ideas the most, I guess, and I believe in him a lot, and I think he can make the difference that we need.
So each of you are first-time voters. Why was it so important now to be engaged, and what matters most to you?
Well, it's important now to be engaged because we have our whole futures ahead of us, and we're going to be voting for the rest of our lives, and this president is the one that's basically going to set the stone for us for the rest of our lives.
What about you, Christian?
Perfectly said. I agree with Lauren.
Yeah,
Jessica?
I agree. I think this election especially is super important because we also have the earth to save at the moment, and that's just very high on the list for I think a lot of people around here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, Ari, Keene went for Bernie Sanders in the primary and then Hillary Clinton in the general election. All the campaigns have been here time and time again trying to rally folks like these students and these folks behind us.
Thank you. A lot of energy. We go from outside with Tremaine to inside with Morgan. What are you seeing?
Well, we don't have, Ari, as much energy as those college students, but we do have a little bit of energy inside this national polling station here. About 2,000 people have been inside this polling station. And there's a couple things that are interesting about this area. This city is the most diverse city in the state, so it's not surprising. We saw Deval Patrick, we saw former Mayor Pete Buttigieg come by and really try to make their case to these voters. But among these voters, some of the most important are those famed undecided New Hampshire voters. I want to introduce you to Terry here. Terry, we are live now on MSNBC.
Hi.
And tell us what made your decision. When did you decide?
I made my final decision this morning.
Just this morning?
Yeah.
And who did you vote for?
I voted for Amy.
Why is that?
Because I think Amy's a unifier. And she's also moderate in terms of her policies. And I think that she can really bring us together and move the country forward.
Were you leaning towards anyone else prior to deciding to vote for Senator Klobuchar?
You know, I was kind of going back and forth between her and Pete Buttigieg, and gave my final choice to Amy.
And I know when we spoke earlier, you also mentioned you had considered former Vice President Joe Biden.
Very early.
He picked up stakes and he left New Hampshire earlier today. Did that affect your decision at all?
No, only that it confirmed that he wouldn't have been the right choice for me.
Okay. And what about Iowa? After all the confusion we saw in Iowa, did that affect your decision-making process?
Not really.
No.
No. I was just happy that hopefully New Hampshire will do it the more straightforward way.
So the grandstand was a process clean for you? Was it
very
simple?
clean, very simple. Yeah, yes. The whole thing took like 5 minutes.
Well,
absolutely.
There you have it, Ari. So we've been talking to a lot of people throughout the state here, and it's interesting, of course, New Hampshire, you have more people who are not just Democrat, not just Republican, but the majority are actually some of those undeclared and even some of those undecided voters, just like we met with Terry. Ari?
Fantastic. Morgan and Tremaine, thanks to both of you. I want to bring in Gabe Debinetti, New York Magazine national correspondent, Jess Bidgood from the Boston Globe, and David Cohen from the Washington Bureau for Mother Jones. Nice to see all of you here.
It's great to be here.
Great to be in New Hampshire.
David, you've covered a couple of these before. How's it feel?
This feels a little bit different in the sense that there will be a winner tonight, at least we hope. That will be pretty clear. But I don't think it's going to be as defining a race as we've seen in the past, in part because there are a lot of candidates. Last time it was Bernie and Hillary 1 and 2, and that was basically it. But I also think that whoever wins tonight, and likely to be Bernie Sanders or Pete Buttigieg, they're going to win with probably about 25% of the vote. In past elections here, the winners have gotten anywhere from 40, 50, 60%. So that will not be decisive and say, this is who the Democratic Party wants. There'll be a second close place finisher. And I think the third tier, and you saw in that poll how close Klobuchar, Warren, and Biden were polling, will be kind of indicative of who maybe gets a little bit of news, but they're going to keep hanging on as well. And this is a preview, I think, of a long, slow slog to the convention, with the X factor of Bloomberg hitting on Super Tuesday.
Yeah, and you mentioned where maybe the most clarifying is in people who are doing worse in this wide field. Just take a listen to Joe Biden and what he sounds like right now.
What does it say about you leaving tonight?
Well, it says I'm going to South Carolina. That's what it says.
Well, what does it say to somebody who might not have voted yet today and in this state and is thinking, you know, Biden doesn't even...
Well, I don't think they think that. We'll find out.
Joe Biden has been lowering expectations all week here in New Hampshire. He said earlier this week he took a hit in Iowa, and he expects to take a hit again here in New Hampshire. He said that on the debate stage on Friday. And it looks like at this point he's decided the move is to cut his losses in a way, get to South Carolina, get to a state where he's still got some strength. Black voters make up the majority of the electorate of the Democratic electorate in South Carolina. And just today, there's some polling showing that he may be losing some support there. So it seems like he's decided that the move for him is to get to South Carolina and stabilize himself there and let New Hampshire voters do what they will.
But what does it tell you about how he's done in these first two races? I mean, if your argument is vote for me because other people will vote for me, and that doesn't happen and people aren't voting for you, it seems to hurt you more than, say, a candidate who finishes third and says, look, my argument's not electability, my argument is believe in me and I can rise.
Absolutely. All year, Biden has premised, the central premise of his campaign is I am electable, I can win. He likes to say I can beat Donald Trump like a drum. Without posting a strong showing in Iowa and unlikely to post a strong showing here, that puts that whole argument in question, and he's got to find a way to shore it up.
And Gabe, I want to read from your new piece, which talks again about how different things are. History is really interesting, but it doesn't always tell you what this year's going to be like. You write, a consensus has settled here in the final hours that it looks like Democrats' nominating contest could take a while. That's the fear recently moved in the back of the minds of Democratic pros and to the forefront of some of their worries, a long, drawn-out primary that grows increasingly divisive for months, maybe even leading into a contentious convention in Milwaukee this summer. What are you getting at here?
Yeah, well, basically the idea here is that we're not going to have a clear front runner, a clearly shaped race, no matter what happens here tonight. Even if Bernie Sanders wins by a fairly healthy margin, in terms of the actual delegates, which is how you actually win this thing, it's likely to still be fairly distributed across the candidates. And even if, let's say, Sanders, he sort of did well in Iowa, he sort of won Iowa, or split delegates more or less with Buttigieg. Let's say he wins by a lot tonight. Even if he wins Nevada, and even if he surprises everyone and wins South Carolina, the establishment Democrats are not going to say, okay, this is Bernie's race to lose. There is still going to be a pretty big delegate mix here, especially because there's so many different
Let's dig into that, because, David, there's a big difference between the first few states basically congealing around the person who looks like they're the leader, and a lot of folks want to see, hey, who does well? Maybe they'll have the enthusiasm to beat Trump. The establishment treats Bernie Sanders differently. The idea being, if a quote-unquote Biden-style candidate won several of the first states, everyone say, great, let's wrap this up. If Bernie Sanders does, suddenly there's this attitude of, well, maybe that's not good enough. Well, what is that?
Well, if he wins, he still will be winning with a quarter of the vote, meaning that 75% of the Democrats are not with him. And, of course, the established Democrats, corporate Democrats, whatever you want to call them, will be horrified by his policies, and you've seen them already speaking out against that. So there will be this moment of panic at some point. What do we do? Who is the establishment candidate or the more moderate candidate?
And you're saying that applies only to Sanders?
Well, mostly. I mean, there's a little bit of that with Elizabeth Warren, but mostly focused on Sanders, particularly if he takes the lead. So then, but if Biden's slipping, who do they go to? Is Amy Klobuchar rising? Do they switch there? And then do they get behind Michael Bloomberg?
And Jess, this is where some people argue there is an echo of the other untraditional candidate in the Republican primary last time, which is everyone was allowed to run away with it except for Donald Trump. The Republican establishment on its side was saying, well, maybe we stop him at the convention. Is that something that Democrats really will mobilize and do well with? Or do you have to fall in line behind the person who's in the lead?
I think that is a question that Democrats are still working their way through. And I think that there are candidates who are looking at this wide field, this unsettled field, and saying, that's where my opportunity is. Elizabeth Warren is a good example of that. She came in third in Iowa. She is not expected to win here. And she's emphasizing that she's got a big, wide national ground game. And I think the hope for a candidate like her is that if things remain unsettled, she can stay in the game, build delegates slowly over time, and emerge as a kind of consensus candidate in a fairly cleaved field.
And that's one thing we're seeing here, Gabe, which is different than other cycles, as you mentioned, two candidates. There are so many candidates that people may narrow it down to who they like in top 2, top 3. Sure. But out of 6 or 8, it's hard to decide all of a sudden. You definitely have one that's perfect. And we saw that in a new reporting. We always like to listen to the voters of someone being very candid. You can sound smart and claim you know why this is your person and you've read all their plans. But sometimes you say, I like 2 people. I don't know. Take a look at this moment today in New Hampshire. Take a look. Sure.
Who'd you vote for today?
I voted for Amy Klobuchar.
Tell me why.
I actually went in and eeny, meeny, miny, moed it.
You're kidding me.
No, between
Literally
two candidates.
in the booth.
In the booth.
Yeah, well, listen, that's obviously an extreme version of what we've been hearing, nonstop when you go to these events.
Is it extreme? Let me press you. Is it extreme? Or is it just more honest? It's like everyone likes to say they have a million reasons. Sure. But everyone's also stuck between what we hear. I've talked to a lot of voters in lines this weekend. People feel like they have more than one good choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, at the end of the day, if you really get a lot of the people who work on these campaigns, to speak honestly about this, what they're going to say is people are going to vote for the candidate that they really just feel best about in the final moment there when they're finally making that decision. That's why I think a lot of the people who were surrounding Joe Biden were aghast with what he's saying in the last few days, which is sort of pulling back from New Hampshire, because a lot of them felt, well, there's still a chance that he could, be the one to make them
You're suggesting the best closing message is not, I'm out of here?
That's probably not going to be the one to carry him to
Gabe, Jess, and David here in Manchester, thank you so much.
I'm undecided still, yeah.
We voted for Mayor Pete.
Who do you think I should vote for?
I voted for Elizabeth. I'm a woman, and I've loved her for years, and I've got to stand up for her.
And why'd you pick Bernie?
I just think he's who this country needs right now.
I loved Amy Klobuchar and Andrew Yang. It was really tough.
May I ask, who did you cast your ballot for today?
Steyer.
I did also to Steyer.
Biden is going to give him a run, but I also think that Trump has got a lot of experience. I'd like to see a woman get up close, but we'll see what happens.
There you have it. We've been listening to voters out on the trail, and I'm here with a lot of voters in Manchester. And we want to do something that's really interesting to do on a primary day, given that this is what it all comes down to, which is how do people feel? So this is real. We haven't pre-prepped any of this, but I do understand you guys are New Hampshire voters, yeah?
We're masked.
You're masked. You're in New Hampshire?
First time.
And so have you voted yet?
I have.
And who did you vote for?
I voted for Senator Elizabeth Warren.
And this is your first vote of your life?
It is, it is.
You never forget your first. Why?
I think Senator Warren has the progressive ideals that I really support and stand behind, while also having the articulate, process of communicating these ideals that I think other progressive candidates.
You knew where she was coming from. And last question, how did you learn about it? Did you watch the debates? Did you go to any events?
I went to an event back in February, but I didn't decide to vote for her until this morning.
Until today. All right, let's go over here. We got some people over here. New Hampshire voters here? Yeah. All right, who made up their mind recently? You, who'd you vote for?
I voted this morning, and I went for the other half of the New York Times endorsement for Amy Klobuchar.
It is always a lot of excitement here. It is always helpful when the endorsement is of two people, right? That really helps narrow it down.
It did. I knew I was voting for a woman. Amy stood out to me this past weekend. There were some big things that she made in strides against the other candidates. And I just also thought, I reflected on being here in New Hampshire. We're very mindful that the country, that the world is looking at the choices we make. And so thinking about my fellow friends, family, I thought, who could we come together around? And it really was between Warren and Klobuchar. And at that last moment this morning at 6 a.m., I cast that vote.
Wow. And we've heard a lot of voters talk about Amy Klobuchar finishing strong. Let me pop over here. Who else has voted here? Yeah? Who did you vote for?
I actually am not going to tell you who I voted for.
You're not going to? Wait, hold on. Wait, let me try something. You know I'm a journalist.
Yes, I know.
Will you please tell me who you voted for?
That was very polite, but no,
And that's your right.
It is.
Why don't you tell us, though, what was on your mind? What issues or ideas were on your mind?
Education, the environment, looking at someone who could bring the country together, because I think that's what we need right now. We need to be one country, and we need to rally around issues that really matter.
What about here? Anybody? I see the sticker. You want to tell us what was on your mind or who you voted for?
Not today.
What about over here? Anybody else? And you got to look at this. Talk about endorsements.
Morning Joe.
Can we get this? We got a Morning Joe pin right here.
Yes, absolutely.
And so did you vote for Joe today? Right in.
We have not voted yet.
Haven't voted yet. You know who you're going to vote for? Who are you going to vote for?
Pete Buttigieg.
Why Pete?
There's a number of things. His humanity as a person really appeals to me too. Qualities like honesty, integrity, empathy, moral character. Those qualities are absolutely everything in a person.
So really looking at him as the characteristics that he brings as a potential leader. I'm going to talk to a few more voters, but I want to show everyone at home how we're seeing the candidates closing with a lot of back and forth and a lot of arguments against, of course, the person they would all run against if they win the nomination, President Trump. Take a look.
The Democrat Party wants to run your health care, but they can't even run a caucus in Iowa. My only problem is I'm trying to figure out who is their weakest candidate. I think they're all weak. We have so much more enthusiasm than that's not even close. They're all fighting each other. They're all going after each other. You got them all over the place.
I refuse to suggest any Democrat can lose. I think, we could run Mickey Mouse against this president and have a shot.
He's like the rooster who thinks he made the sun come up.
Say racist, a sexist, a xenophobe, a homophobe, and a religious bigot. And those are his nice qualities.
You can see just how tough it's getting. Now, we're here back with our Manchester voters. I want to check in. I see some stickers. You voted today?
Yes.
Who did you vote for?
Pete.
Why?
He's moderate, he's smart, he's inspiring.
Who else voted today here? Anyone? No? No? What about over here?
I voted.
Who did you vote for?
I voted for Bernie, although there are a number of candidates that I really like, and so I felt like when I finished voting, I was still undecided, including Elizabeth, including Michael Bennett, for that matter.
Now, that's sort of a paradox to decide and then feel undecided. So you're a complex person.
Well, yes, but I want to say the reason I went for Bernie is because of MSNBC. And
Go on.
I think it is completely cynical to say that he's lost 50% of his vote from the last time when there were two candidates. Now there are multiple wonderful candidates who would be great presidents and people that I think that we can unify and get behind. But the kind of the stop Bernie cynicism that I heard from a number of people, I watch MSNBC constantly, so I heard that from a number of commentators, and so it made me angry enough. I said, okay, Bernie's got my vote.
This is such an interesting point. What you're saying is, and we take criticism because we're journalists, right? We got to be open-minded. You're saying that hearing from people, whether it's guests, contributors, the conversations you've heard, that you felt were designed to tear down Senator Sanders or quote-unquote stop him, actually endeared him to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. I could have chosen several candidates, but that's what pushed me over the edge for Bernie.
That's really interesting, and thank you for sharing it. See, I knew you were complex. That's a layered way to make the decision. Thank you so much. I'm going to do one more. I see you've got a voted sticker. Yes. Who did you vote for?
I ended up voting for Pete, and I always made fun of people who said, oh, I couldn't decide till that morning, and this morning I was going back and forth between Amy and Pete, and you'll be mad at me, but the whole reason I went with Pete is because I think that if Bernie won, it would be disastrous. And I felt if I voted for Amy, I'd be throwing away my vote, and I want to see Pete do very, very well in New Hampshire.
Well, and so let me ask, do you all know each other then?
No, she probably won't want to know me anymore.
Well, this is New Hampshire. Maybe we could have a whole conversation, maybe over some Dunkin'.
I wish that Congress could do like the people in New Hampshire, and even if we disagree, we get along and we work things out.
Do you want to say anything to her?
I like Pete. I like Pete very much.
All right, not so bad. Not so bad. Look, this has been really fascinating. I want to thank you guys and everyone here who's been sharing their views with us. We're going to fit in a quick break. When we come back... Welcome back to our special MSNBC coverage of the New Hampshire primary, live from Manchester. A lot of energy here, right? Yeah. The presidential candidates are clearly out in force. It's a final pitch to people in the Granite State as they head to their polls. And there's a new national Monmouth University poll that shows Sanders surging at 26, Joe Biden at 16, Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren down at 13. Let's bring in our political panel. We have staff writer at The Atlantic, Edward Isaac Dover, national politics reporter from the Wall Street Journal, Joshua Jamerson, and New York Times reporter Katie Glick. Good to see each of you. Katie, when you look at this race and you see the way it is shaping up, finishing strong seems to matter a lot in New Hampshire.
Absolutely. And, especially for Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden, there is a lot at stake for both of them tonight. Elizabeth Warren, of course, neighboring state senator from Massachusetts, who has a renowned organization. She was thought for a long time to have some advantages here. But, it is going to be kind of a real question about where she ends up coming in, especially at a moment of surge for Bernie Sanders, who's also really dominated that lane with more progressive voters. And then for Joe Biden, who is fresh off a fourth-place finish in Iowa, which is really disappointing to a lot of his supporters. He's not actually going to be here tonight. He sort of taking stock of the possibility of a fourth place or even fifth place finish potentially in New Hampshire, is actually moving on to South Carolina, where he's hoping to still have a strong showing.
Yeah, and Joshua, the national polls don't tell you much. Otherwise, you'd have a President Giuliani, a President Kaine. You remember the President Kaine? That was quite some 4 years. Yeah. So we know that. But what we do see is a flavor. And the flavor in that national polling we just showed would suggest that a lot of Democrats around the country are willing to follow Iowa and what may come out of New Hampshire in rallying around Sanders. What does that tell you?
Well, I think Katie when she was talking earlier about where Elizabeth Warren is going to finish, I think one of the things that maybe we didn't see coming was just how much the national conversation might tamp down some of her momentum in a state where she should have an advantage, being so close to her neighboring state of Massachusetts. What I think is interesting going forward forward is just kind of if she's actually able to stay in the conversation, even if she isn't winning some of these early states. One sign of where her mind is right after New Hampshire, she's going to make her first campaign stop in Virginia, a Super Tuesday state. So she's signaling that she's going to be around for a while to try to collect as many delegates to remain viable.
And Isaac, take a listen to some of the interviews we've done out here and what we've been hearing from, something that a lot of folks have talked about. There is something of the evidence of an Amy Klobuchar boomlet. Take a look.
After her debate performance, I thought she was amazing, and I like her experience and her age. So I think,
Were you leaning a different way before the debate?
Yes.
Toward
Mayor Pete.
I was pretty much Biden all the way, but just been watching her in the last couple of weeks and watching her tonight. I'm reconsidering it.
Both of you reconsidering.
I think she'll do well in a debate against Trump.
Just beating Trump is top of your list?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Right. We thought we were going to be voting for Mayor Pete, but after her performance on Friday night and seeing her today, I think that we're giving Senator Klobuchar a closer look.
What was important about that debate is, unlike any other debate, it happened 4 days before voting started. She had a very strong performance, and it seems to have resonated with a lot of New Hampshire voters at a time when the race is in flux and when people were looking at some of the others and saying, Biden's weak, are they comfortable with Pete Buttigieg? Who is the person who can be that counterpoint to Bernie Sanders? And it seems like that's been going. I went to an event on Sunday with Klobuchar here in Manchester, and for the first time ever in all the year plus that I've been covering Klobuchar, the police officer stopped me at the door and he said, "We're at capacity, I can't let you in." I had to wait for a few minutes for someone else to walk out. It's real what's going on here on the ground.
But one thing that has been very striking to me as a reporter who covers Joe Biden predominantly is at a lot of his events and at events of a couple of other candidates that I've gotten to attend over the last week, what's so striking is the number of voters who fit exactly the profile that Biden has been targeting. They are moderate. They're sometimes, depending on the kind of voter, maybe a little bit older. They have labor ties, but consistently we're saying that they were actually looking at some of the other candidates, whether that was Pete Buttigieg or Amy Klobuchar. And it really was a signal of how much competition there is for the moderate lane that Biden has been trying to dominate, and until recently his supporters had sort of thought that he was dominating, and it absolutely is a warning sign for him in the hours before the primary.
And Joshua, when you look at these head-to-head matchups, one of the things that comes through is, in theory, Donald Trump is very beatable in the numbers. But that was true in 2016. So who knows? But when you look at this, what jumps out to me about the spread is if you look at the top four, we were just talking about Klobuchar, Biden, Sanders, Bloomberg, those are very similar spreads with a plus or minus margin of error of 2.5. What does it tell you that in theory, a lot of people are open to any number of Democrats, including, I would note, Bernie Sanders and now ex-Republican Mike Bloomberg?
And Elizabeth Warren, too, winning the head-to-head. I think the important thing is that Democrats have been doing this electability test in their heads. And like you were saying with Amy's moment, she's having a very good electability argument. You heard people just in this room and outside this room say that they thought they could see her on a stage going toe-to-toe with President Trump. She's having her electability point right now. People are thinking about who can beat Donald Trump, who's the best person, and I think Amy's surge is coming at just the right time.
I want to thank Isaac, Joshua, and Katie, all here in Manchester. Thank you so much. Welcome back to our special coverage of the New Hampshire primary. You can see the Pack Cafe right here in Manchester. And I should note, technically, the first votes are already in. 5 residents in that tiny town of Dixville Notch voting just after midnight. That's a tradition here. 3 people wrote in votes for Mike Bloomberg there, in addition to votes for Sanders and Buttigieg. Now, that outcome may be purely symbolic, but it is a reminder of how Bloomberg looms over this Democratic race. And now he's getting hit today over 2015 statements defending racial profiling that were unearthed by podcast host Benjamin Dixon, who is a Sanders supporter. But that's not all. Donald Trump's campaign manager has a new tweet up with the same audio, and that comes after President Donald Trump posted and then deleted this tweet calling Bloomberg a, quote, total racist. NBC News has reached out to the White House about this. Now, let's be clear. Donald Trump endorsed the exact same stop and frisk policy that's under discussion, which makes that now deleted tweet something of a self-condemnation. NBC News has not verified this new audio recording, newly unearthed, but I can tell you the record shows it's consistent with the case that Mike Bloomberg made for years. He defended his policing policies in New York, and they did involve over 5 million stops total of mostly innocent minorities. In fact, this is an issue we've been covering. I recently asked Bloomberg's campaign manager, Kevin Sheekey, about the issue. And here's the exchange, beginning with playing Bloomberg's past defense.
They just keep saying, oh, it's a disproportionate percentage of a particular ethnic group. That may be, but it's not a disproportionate percentage of those who witnesses and victims describe as committing the murder. In that case, incidentally, I think we disproportionately stop whites too much and minorities too little.
Is that still his position?
No, Mike said he got it wrong. And you could keep asking the question, and I'll keep telling you. He said he got it wrong. What he didn't get wrong is that he was one of the few public officials in this country who actually cared to do something about it. He might have been the only public official in the country who took on the NRA in the way that he did. He was the only mayor at the time, while the prison population was going up 6%, over his early years reduced it by 36%.
Bloomberg also responding today by emphasizing he, quote, regrets and apologizes for the policy and also condemning Donald Trump's tweet for its division. I'm joined by Maya Wiley, who is from the New School and also was former counsel to the New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and has been an overseer of the Police Oversight Board in New York City, making her very versed in all of these issues. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Ari. We miss you here in New York.
Well, I'm well taken care of here in Manchester. I'll tell you, this is one of those issues that we definitely wanted to include in our reporting because I think more than one thing can be true. First, it can be true that Donald Trump has zero credibility or standing to call anyone a, quote, racist, full stop. But second, I think it can be true that as voters assess the records of all of the candidates, including Mr. Bloomberg, who wants the Democratic nomination, as I press his campaign manager, the history here is important. Given all of your work on it, what do you think people should know as they watch this debate play out?
You know, this is such an important debate, and I agree with you about Donald Trump. And what's so important for this conversation about stop and frisk, not just in New York City, by the way, because it's not just and wasn't just a New York City phenomenon, but when Michael Bloomberg says he got it wrong, he says he got it wrong in 2020 when we've had more than 6 years of data demonstrating that 90% of people who were largely black and Latino who were being stopped and frisked in New York City were never even being summoned as a result of that stop. What that told us was they did nothing wrong. They were being stopped merely because police officers decided to stop them for their appearance, and there was very little left for a federal judge but to find that that was essentially racial profiling. That they were not, unlike Michael Bloomberg's statement, matching some description where the description was of someone who was black or Latino. And the other thing to point out is in January of 2019, a year ago, Michael Bloomberg doubled down on his defense of stop and frisk, again, with crime numbers dropping every year in the city, particularly on murders. And by the way, he had made the point that stop and frisk was important to get weapons off the street. And I believe that Michael Bloomberg deserves a lot of credit for his efforts on gun violence. And by the way, the New York City Police Department got a lot of guns off the street. That is true. What isn't true is that people who were stopped and frisked had weapons. Very, very few. 1.5% of people who were stopped recovered a weapon. And by the way, weapon doesn't necessarily mean gun. It could have been knife. So it wasn't solving any problem, but I tell you what it was doing. It was traumatizing black and Latino New York City residents. And to a point where literally furtive action, that means you flinch or kind of run and turn away when you see a police officer coming, that would give police an excuse to stop someone. But unfortunately, part of why people were doing that is they were so terrified of the police department. And what we need for public safety in this country is for police to be trusted partners with community. And stop and frisk was the very thing that kept police and community apart, which meant our communities were not as safe as they should be. So unfortunately, Michael Bloomberg is not very credible on this point. I think it's absolutely accurate to say he has apologized. He apologized in 2020 with years of data and a federal court decision that he said he would appeal that had demonstrated that stop and frisk was nothing but profiling Black and Latino New Yorkers.
Well, you lay it all out. The last thing I want to ask you is on the facts. The policies matter. People want safe communities. A lot of people want communities that also have protection and equality for everyone. A lot of debate on that on the trail. When I spoke to Mr. Sheikhy about this, he seemed to vacillate between saying, Mike was wrong, we will never do it again, so trust us in the White House, and then also saying, but maybe the policy helped lower murder in New York, which is a big claim. What's your view on that claim?
The data doesn't make the claim. I mean, look, I think we need a president. I'm not telling people who to vote for, but one of the things we need in the next president is one that tells the truth and bases it on fact. That is not what the data shows. Right. What the data shows is that folks weren't even given a summons after they were stopped. That means they were not murderers. That means they were not even guilty of a crime the police could take them to a precinct on.
It means they weren't charged, let alone tried, let alone convicted. So it's quite a distance away. There's a lot going on. This is such an important story, and one when you have the president, the mayor, and others clashing on it today. We wanted to go to someone with the facts and the experience. Thank you for being that person, Maya Wiley.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you. We're going to fit in a break. Next, we have a lot more from the New Hampshire voters you see right here in this room. We're going to go full Donahue and hear what last-minute deciders think. Stay with us. We are back live in New Hampshire with a lot of voters and a lot of energy. And we spoke to these voters a little bit earlier in the show about decision making. What I want to do right now is just get a real quick sense, because this is something we hear so much about, which is how recently have people made up their mind. By a show of hands, if you decided within the last week, put your hand up. If you made your decision within the last week, let's take a look at that. That's a lot of hands, which just goes to how important this home stretch is. And I see some hands up over here. So let's go over here. Let's see. All three of you decided within the last week? Yes. All right. What were you waiting for?
Well, there's a lot of talent out there, and it had to be a very strategic decision, because I think that the far, far left might be not able to attract the independent and the disgruntled Republican voter.
Is far, far left your nickname for Bernie Sanders?
Bernie, and right next door with Elizabeth, yes.
And that for you is too far?
I think globally it's too far for the general population to be thinking.
So with making this decision here in the last week, what clinched it for you?
It narrowed it down to Pete and Amy. And then I watched the debate. I was at the debate, actually. And just the experience level nudged me to vote for Amy this morning.
Did you? And we're hearing that from a lot of folks. What about you? You decided in the last week. What made up your mind?
I decided yesterday. I saw all 25 candidates, including Bloomberg, and there was a lot of information to process. I loved them all, and I really, really fell in love with each one for a few weeks here and there. So a shout out to Pete and a shout out to Bennett. Bennett I particularly fell in love with, but I didn't think he had any traction, so I went with Amy.
You went with Amy Klobuchar?
I did go with Amy.
And since you said shout out to Bennett, do you want to look into the camera and say anything to Michael Bennett about how much you love him, even though you didn't get your vote?
I think he is really an amazing, amazing candidate, and I hope that he ends up somewhere in our system because he deserves it. I think I'd love to see him as Secretary of State.
Very interesting. We have just 20 seconds. You also made up your mind. What clinched it for you?
I went to an event with Amy, and it really clinched me, but Trump's show last night, when I went in this morning to vote, I'm an independent. I went to Republican and did a protest vote and voted for Bill Weld.
For Bill Weld. Very interesting. All right. Thanks to everyone. A lot of hands up here on the late deciders. So much to hear from. What we're going to do is fit in a break, and coming up, I'm going to speak in this room to my colleague Katie Tur when we come back.